This podcast is for entertainment purposes only. The hosts are not trained professionals, and their opinions come from personal experience, not professional training. In this episode, we discuss fictional depictions of trauma and violence that may not be suitable for all listeners, so please take care of yourselves. Specific content warnings for each episode can be found in the show notes. Events in the media are discussed in approximate order of escalation. This episode contains spoilers. Today's episode is on Catching Fire, Book 2 of The Hunger Games. In this book, Katniss and Peeta find themselves back in the arena, fighting for their lives against the winners of past contests. Hi, I'm Nicole.
And I'm Robin, and this is Books That Burn. Alright, for the factions in Catching Fire, we have Katniss, Peeta, Gale, Haymitch, Cinna, and the prep team, Primrose, yes, Prim, Katniss's mother, residents of District 12, the Champion Tributes, residents of other districts, specifically District 11, President Snow, and the residents of the Capitol. Are you ready to talk about Cinna for our minor character spotlight?
Yeah, so Cinna is an interesting character.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of Cinna's... Alright. There's a lot we could talk about with Cinna, but specifically what we're talking about today is how much he is really in charge of managing other people's emotions, and how much there's a lot of him not being outwardly emotional about things that really matter to him, and there's also a lot of him protecting other people and specifically the tributes and specifically Katniss. From the things that other people are going through.
And we're not just reading into it that he cares more than he says, because his actions show it. Like, he says, channeling everything into his work where it won't hurt anyone but him. He specifically says that.
Yeah. So, and there's a moment that really, made us decide to do him as a topic. There's a moment where Katniss's prep team has been crying over her and to her and at her about the fact that she's going into the arena again. And the first time she sees Cinna, she straight up tells him, "Don't let me go through them doing that again." And that was when they kind of have this a tiny bit of dialogue, a tiny moment where he basically says, "Don't worry, I'll take care of it. And also, you don't have to worry about me doing that to you. Because when I'm upset, I put it into my costuming, and this is how I handle my emotions." And she was like, "Oh, good." So it's literally explicitly stated that this is how he handles everything.
And whatever he did to get them to not cry in front of her, it 95% worked. Yeah. Because even into mocking,
oh my God,
they're trying not to cry in front of her.
They are now super aware of it and stuffing down tears and sending each other out of the room like, "No, you're gonna break down, leave." And it's very funny. It's almost comedic.
Yeah, it is definitely a little bit of a bright spot. Yeah, the bright spot is that people are going out of the room to cry. This is a dark book.
Yeah. So speaking of channeling his emotions into his work.
Yes, the Mockingjay wedding dress.
This is one thing that I just think is a very cool visual, the way it's described in the book. A lot of the descriptions of Cinna's outfits especially, but the clothing in general is very visceral, very visual. But this is really cool.
And because it's possible that you haven't read the book or seen the movies, I haven't seen the movies, I don't know how they did this, but at least how it's described in the book is she's in this wedding dress and it's white, and it is the one that everybody voted on and she has to be in because she has to be in this dress she doesn't want for the wedding she doesn't want. To the person she doesn't really like that way. And she spins, and
raises
she
her
spins,
arms. That was the trigger.
Yes, that was the trigger, the physical trigger. Spins and raises her arms, and as she twirls, the wedding dress burns up, and all the white overstuff burns away, and it turns into a black version of the dress, still with feathers, and it makes her look like this symbol of the resistance, this bird, the mockingjay. Yeah. And that moment, that is Cinna channeling everything into his work.
It's also him as the designer explicitly endorsing the rebellion. Because he is the only person that could have made her dress be this thing, and the Capitol knows it. Like, Katniss could not have done that without him.
And the reason this is important in terms of trauma for him is that we get to the second part of the trauma, where now that he has managed everybody's emotions and channeled his into his work where they won't hurt Katniss, he is beaten up in an elevator where Katniss can see, and then we never see him again. He probably was killed. He might have been tortured. We don't know, but for the rest of the book, everyone, and the rest of the series, everyone believes that he was killed and or tortured, and that's just taken as a fact.
Yeah.
And nothing in the book, he doesn't, like, not to spoil book 3, nothing magically happens to counteract that narrative. And so he knew he was gonna die for doing that. People were dying for less. Like, we don't have him saying he knew, but given the world he lived in, there's no way he didn't.
I mean, he navigated the Capitol's violence as a clothing designer for the tributes for like a year. Like, this was his career. So
yeah, my understanding was Katniss was his first tribute.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because it was he had been a designer, and then
I mean, but this is still his career, and he was still chosen to be a designer. There's only 12 slots for that in the whole I almost said kingdom.
24, because each half of the thing.
Oh, I thought he designed for both of them.
Nope, PETA has their own person, I think. Well, PETA has his own prep team, regardless.
I don't think
there's
he has his
either
own
12 or
because
24
Cinna designed their costumes to go together.
Oh.
Every time.
Okay, never mind.
I'm pretty sure.
So, there's... so, the most important thing being, there's 12 slots for this job.
And he made it.
And if you do the wrong thing...
If you do the wrong thing,
get killed.
At any point in your career, you don't make it to this slot. Yeah. And he...
Yeah. I was going to say, if you do the wrong thing at any point in your career, you could get killed. If you do the wrong thing once you're in this slot, you will get killed.
Absolutely. Yeah, Cinna is honestly a very interesting character, just because even from the beginning, when Katniss first gets that, like, she very quickly has her own kind of text, and where her own inner monologue where she's saying, like, that he is the person she is depending on, and kind of feels like he is her one kind of port in the storm, especially before she trusts Haymitch, and especially when she's not sure how to handle PETA, and especially when, you know, everybody is trying to give her advice on handling the crowd. Cinna is the one that she listens to, and he's the one that she goes back to, and he's the one that she really honestly thinks knows what he's doing, and there's some things where, like, you know, her prep team does some stuff with makeup, and she looks at him and says, hey, and, like, the first glance, he looks at her and basically goes, no, that won't work. And he's really honestly one of the first people who kind of, I'm not even going to say the first. I think he's the only person we get in the entire book who figures out pretty quickly who she is as a person and works with her instead of trying to force her to do or be or react in a way that's contrary to who she is. I mean, his portrayals of her, his costuming for her, his critique, and so, I think there's at least once in the first book where he actually makes the prep team redo her makeup because somebody else had control of it, and then she comes in front of him and he takes one look at her and goes, no. That won't work because you as a person, that doesn't work. And so we're going to redo it so that it actually makes sense for who you are. And I honestly, I can't think of another person in the entire series who just works with her as a human being instead of treating her like a prop that they can make perform. And I mean, it says a lot that he is able to do that and also is, not at least until the very end where he blatantly defies the Capitol with her wedding dress. But it says a lot that he is that kind of person who has kind of survived this world and isn't part of the cruelty of the Capitol and doesn't condone it and actively pushes back against it and protects Katniss from it. And I don't know. It's just very interesting.
We love Cinna. Everyone loves Cinna in the books. Just he's so great, but also I think it's important to note that part of why everyone loves him is that he doesn't burden them with his emotions, so he's very much someone that people pour into.
Yeah.
And in terms of trauma,
that's a lot.
That's a lot. You can only take that for so long. And he only takes it for so long until he throws it back at the Capitol and is killed for it. And you can't, I don't know, I was just thinking to check in on your strong friends kind of a thing. 'Cause he seems like the kind of person who was everybody's strong friend. And
yeah. Well, and especially when we have in canon that he, as someone who is clothing designer, as someone who's in charge of a look, we get very much in canon that those are the people that talk and chat and gossip and get the people that they're working with to talk. And it's just a very, he's set up to be a captive audience also, just in general.
Yep. All right. Bye, Cinna. Miss you. I loved every section about him in the books. It's just, For Katniss, depictions of reliving trauma, and we're going to call this Hollywood PTSD. It hits all the story beats of how PTSD gets depicted in film and popular media, and we understand that real PTSD is a little bit different, but the author clearly wants the reader to think PTSD, and since our stance is that the author has inflicted this on the character, we're gonna use PTSD just as a shorthand throughout the rest of this section. We're not saying anything about anyone real who does or does not have PTSD, but
yeah, but this is very clearly one of those where that is the depiction goal.
Yeah, that's what you're supposed to think of. So Katniss and her PTSD. Oh, the nightmares. So many nightmares. So she has PTSD from book 1, which makes sense. She has nightmares and have part of, as we talked about in book 1, the fake relationship with PETA. In book 2, stuff gets added to it because having someone else, specifically him, in this case, in bed helps to keep the nightmares away. And
which, to be fair, was something that started in book 1.
Yeah.
But in book 2, she has a lot of internal monologue about how if he's not there, there's nightmares every night forever. And it's she does not ever have sleep that doesn't include them. And her, I will give,
and
I
he
would like
does
to
too.
give that's fair. He does too. I would like to give the author some credit here. So Hollywood PTSD, Hollywood's version of PTSD that they like to put up on screen. A lot of times what you'll see, especially in movies, is, or I mean in books too, but especially in movies, you'll see like the reoccurring single nightmare that happens every time you fall asleep, and it's the one that you experience. And that's not what this author did. Mm-hmm. And I would just like to point out that this is I don't want to call it better, but a more varied, more nuanced portrayal of this. There's PTSD has a lot of real life variance, and we're not trying to say, that Katniss's PTSD is the only way to experience it. Hollywood PTSD is a quote unquote real permutation, but also it's not the be all and end all. But and I think it is a very good portrayal here of this, where Katniss's nightmares are varied, and they very clearly have pullbacks and flashbacks to the trauma that she's experienced, but they change. Yeah. And they're also very clearly inspired by whatever it is that she just went through. Anytime there's a nightmare reference or depiction, we can see the threads of that one thing that happened to her today superimposed on the trauma she already experienced.
That's good storytelling.
That's really good storytelling. Like, it's really, really nice. And also from a reader perspective, it's not boring. It's not, of course she dreamed about that one drowning sequence over and over. And I will say that because it's a book, I think it's definitely a lot easier for an author to have that kind of more varied storytelling than it is for, say, a film that would have to then record and film and make up new things. And it's a lot easier, and this is why we call it Hollywood PTSD. It's a lot easier if you're making a movie or if you're making a TV show to film the one scene one time.
And then just use little parts of it as a shorthand for, had the nightmare again. But
yeah, this or even the same 10 seconds over and over every night. And this doesn't do that, and it doesn't do it in a really smart way. And the author is very clearly put some thought into how these nightmares were going to manifest.
Yeah. Like, there's common threads. Like, there's a very particular thing that happened at the very end of book one where pieces of that are a reoccurring feature, but not every single time. Just
not
enough.
Every single time, and not always front and center.
Yeah, not always front and center, and just enough for it to be like, oh, that was the freakiest thing in the arena. But honestly, that was the freakiest thing in the arena. As a reader. So
I'm trying to remember. There was one that kind of stuck in my head, and now I can't remember what the exact thread was.
A thread that connects book 2 and 3, where the nightmares get much weirder, is when she learns certain things about President Snow, and you end up with a bunch of motifs of flowers and roses, and she goes from having nightmares about like wolf creatures with the faces of dead tributes to having nightmares about roses and flowers and the scent of flowers, and making a nightmare about flowers be genuinely terrifying and twisted and scary is well done. in these books, and that one crosses into both 2 and 3, but here is where we're talking about the nightmares. So
and the thing with this particular portrayal is, like, I just want to really, I don't know, I really like the way this was handled in general. But she'll have that thing with the flowers that is very much a current thing that's happening to her. But she sees that depiction on people that have been dead since book 1. Like, it's just it's a very good tie back, it's a very good visual, and it's it makes sense, because it's not just Katniss is working through current trauma in her nightmares. This is all of the undealt with stuff, and so now it's been mixed and rearranged so that she's re-experiencing, like, 4 different traumatic things at the same nightmare.
And because the Hunger Games literally never end.
PTSD.
Because they literally never end, she doesn't ever really get a chance to stop and process and work through stuff and move on. At least not in book 2, for certain. We can quibble about whether she gets to it all in book 3, but not in book 2, which is where we are.
Not in book 2. Not at all. So she also has pretty strong... This is the part... So she also has some pretty strong visual flashbacks. And so here's the thing. In Hollywood PTSD, a lot of the time, these flashbacks are purely visual, and they're always, 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 always triggered by either a specific place or a specific word. Like, you'll see that a lot in movies.
Oh, yeah.
And I actually, also in this book, I think that this was well handled too, because she definitely gets visual flashbacks. We get literal explicit text of her saying, like, her thinking she saw a thing when she walked into that place again, and then she turns and no, it's not there anymore, because she's just going back to that trauma. But also sometimes it is there because the Capitol is still messing with her. But she gets those visual flashbacks, but she also gets, sometimes it's not a visual flashback. And in PTSD, there are multiple types of flashbacks that you can get. And she specifically gets the visual ones that are very Hollywood, but she also gets smell and sounds.
Smell, especially with the flowers, and also other smells.
Oh yeah, but just smell and sound in general, which, I don't know, it's a much more grounded thing for the audience to experience. Especially because it's not, and when I say grounded, I mean the variety of flashback makes it feel more grounded, more real. If it was all olfactory, or if it was all audio, it would still be the same type of, like, hollow feeling that only visual gives you. But the fact that it was all 3 of them, and it rotated, and sometimes it was the same memory being triggered in different senses, and not at the same time, like, not always at the same time. And so I don't know. It was just, as reading it felt more like she was going through this thing, and that you as a reader were watching her go through it. And also, I would like to say too that I don't think we talked in our first episode about the portrayal of food insecurity. Food insecurity, that was a hard read. That was hard to read for us. But I also have PTSD from different things. This was not hard to read.
Well, I also say that's a little bit of a different nature of the thing, because you're not going to be triggered by her triggers.
Well, that's true. That's true. But also, there's a specific reason, because I know for me reading books, sometimes when a character is going through PTSD, especially if it's portrayed in this kind of the same ways that I experience, which Katniss's actually is. Katniss's portrayal is pretty close to some things that I've dealt with. But this was not triggering for me. And the reason I think that I think this was done very well in a way that did actually protect the audience is anytime that she had a trigger, the language used to describe the flashback that she was going through was incredibly third person, incredibly observational language and descriptions. What we did not get, that we could have gotten, and would have been completely in line with the rest of the book, the rest of the series, what we did not get was Katniss walked into the room and the smell of blood enveloped her. We didn't get language like that. We got Katniss walked into the room and thought she could hear again that one sound, and thought for a second that there was a smell of blood, and looked around the room, and the only thing she could think about was the visit with President Snow. That's the kind of descriptions that we got. And the language that was used makes it clear that Katniss is experiencing this, but we as an audience are not. And it was just, I just think that this entire thing was very, very, very well done. And I think it was very good decisions made with how it was done.
Can I also point to, so you're saying something about the language there. I think that by going to this more distant third-person language in a book that, while technically the entire book is third-person, it rides much closer to her thoughts for the rest of it. I think that this distancing also is important when we're talking about trauma, because if the book suddenly switched from I to they, that would...
Oh, yeah.
That'd be a huge, disassociation. But I think that I don't want to assume that the author, was going that far with this. But it has a little bit of that. It has a little bit of that effect, and I think that some disassociation is not out of place for someone in Katniss's position. Oh, I'm not saying it's a good thing. I'm just saying it makes sense that it would happen, and so for that subtle distancing to happen in the books, I think that's very appropriate.
Honestly, with the language used, I don't actually think it's that Katniss is putting a barrier there. I honestly, the way it's written as though Katniss is in the moment and it's overwhelming her, but it's not written to overwhelm the reader. So I don't actually think Katniss has this separation at all.
Oh, okay.
I think it's purely done for the reader. And to be honest, we could assign the author different motives for that language change, as even something even something as utilitarian as just not describing it again and using up more words and not having the book be 50% flashback. But it doesn't really matter in my head why, because the thing that we're talking about is the audience experience. And for me, as an audience member, experiencing that I can witness Katniss have a flashback without having to re-go through what she experienced with her is huge. And yeah, I don't know. It is very much a permutation on that Hollywood PTSD, but as a reader, I thought that it was very well done in a way that did not give me that same feeling, especially when contrasted with the food insecurity.
Yeah.
I think it's just a very good juxtaposition of this was handled very well.
Again, no guarantees that this book will or won't have any impact on your own specific things as a reader, but for us, of the two, the handling of the PTSD was less stressful than the handling of the food insecurity, at least for the two of us. So. On to Katniss and self-sacrifice. As a little bit of an extension of one of our book one topics with the faking a relationship, we move into the very large self-sacrifice of pretending to be pregnant, because that has all kinds of implications for herself and her relationships with everybody else. if she actually had done what is necessary to be pregnant with Peeta's baby.
Yeah,
which they hadn't done. So she's like sacrificing her reputation and identity at minimum, like her with her friends and family, because she doesn't get a chance to tell them it's not real for a very long time.
Well, and she also, by going along with this, she is sacrificing. I mean, she almost goes through. So this is not a thing that she would have wanted, and she specifically in the first book talks a lot about it being a thing that she probably will never want. She does not want to be the parent to a child who then has to experience this culture. She straight up does not want to have children.
And also the way she found out that she was supposedly pregnant is, again, Peeta announcing something without consulting her, and it's part of Haymitch and Peeta's strategy for Peeta and Katniss without consulting Katniss, and
Yeah. Well, and also she experiences some of the same trauma that she would if she were actually pregnant.
Yeah.
Because now she has thoughts and I think even nightmares, and just this crushing, like, you know, if I were to actually bring a child into this world, and she just goes through some of that emotional trauma that would have actually inflicted on her. And like,
given that she is someone who doesn't want to be pregnant and does not want to have a child in the world that she lives in.
Yeah, and specifically, like, she goes through the, if I had a kid, here is all of the things that I would hate about that, and here's all of the things I would be inflicting on them. And I really feel like this is, I honestly, I feel like, I mean, okay, this is not a critique on the author, this is a critique on the character. I don't think this is something that should have been sprung on her, because I don't think the reaction that they got, I think there could have been other reactions, because, like, obviously she's gonna know if she was actually pregnant. Like, Peeta's not gonna know that if she doesn't. And so I think, like,
remember, our premise is that the author is the one with the agency to inflict this on her.
I know.
And
but this is not a critique on the author. This is because I think the author did it on purpose, and I think it was part of just, it is literally the same way that Peeta and Haymitch handle all of the things that they want Katniss to react to live on camera. Like, that's the thing, that's the choice the author made. But I think that specifically for this, Peeta could have known, Haymitch should have found out, that the idea of being pregnant is awful,
terrifying to her,
and terrifying, and not okay with her. And, like, but that's readily available information to them, and they should have bothered. And I'm not saying the author should have changed the decision. I'm saying if Peeta was a real person, if Haymitch was a real person, they should have bothered. And the fact that they didn't means that she just went through a lot of emotional trauma that she had already decided she was not able and willing to handle in real life.
Self-sacrifice, we're going to also dip back into something in book 1 that we hadn't talked about there, but it has implications that carry all the way through.
Yeah.
Because she volunteered as tribute.
Yeah.
For
her little
Prim.
sister.
Because of doing that, she then is in a position to have to go back into the arena again. Just everything just rippling out from that initial self-sacrifice. She tried to save her sister from something and then ends up put on this weird pedestal and just all this stuff above and beyond just what the Capitol was going to try to do to her as any other tribute.
Yeah.
And I don't want to trivialize it as just what the Capitol was going to do to her, but, like, it is more. It's more than what she would have gone through if she had just been a tribute and died in book 1.
Yeah.
And it just
absolutely
keeps carrying on, and she's alive because other people need her.
Yeah, so oh my gosh.
She gets treated like a MacGuffin. We keep talking about how she doesn't even get told what strategies are around her, who her allies are. She has people coming up to her and being like, here, I did the thing you wanted. And she's like, the thing I wanted? What?
Yeah, there's a lot of just... So this is interesting to me, actually, because she is literally treated as an object. She's treated as a visual. She's treated as a thing, a chess piece, without being given any agency or even any information that she doesn't dig out or figure out herself. And she's really good at figuring that information out. But also, she's being very literally objectified, but not in a sexual way. Not in a feminine, like, oppressively patriarchal way. She's being literally treated as an object.
I mean, there's also
shuffled
that
around the board.
But yeah, I mean,
there's that, but not even. But yeah, but like,
she's a symbol and a MacGuffin.
Yeah, and that's it. It's not that plus being a person. It's just that.
Oh, a MacGuffin is the object of your fetch quest.
Oh yeah,
just in case.
Just in case people don't read TV tropes for 16 hours every day.
A fetch quest is where you have to go on a quest to go get a thing.
That one I feel like is a little bit more self-explanatory. Yeah. So, but it's very incredibly traumatic to her, and it causes her to have a lot of issues, even just trusting. I mean, even just trusting her literal allies. Like, you know, because if someone walks up and says, I mean, and she almost, I would even argue, almost feels gaslit by this.
Oh, yeah.
Because of that whole, like, people are coming up to her and saying, like, I did what you wanted. Here's that thing you've been arguing for. Here, look, I saved your stupid important people that you've decided were important. And she's like, what are you talking about? And how would you even know that? And
she told Haymitch no allies. She told him no allies. Like, they decided, she was consulted with, made a decision, and it didn't matter. And that alienation and helplessness.
Oh yeah.
She's ready. She's extremely important without feeling worthwhile. And as the book goes on, she's just ready to die, and she's only staying alive long enough to help Peeta live. But everybody else, including Peeta, is trying to keep her alive and is willing to sacrifice themselves for her.
Mm-hmm.
It is... not trying not to reference other media too much. It is almost as bad as the Winchesters in Supernatural. But she doesn't... Everybody's just throwing self-sacrifice at everybody else. And if you do that back and forth long enough, a lot of people are just going to end up dead.
Yeah.
Which is what happens.
She could have been told. She didn't have to be told all of the things they were trying to keep secret. But they 100% could have just said to her, hey, I know you're also trying to keep Peeta alive. I know that that's your goal. But you should stay alive as long as possible because you are the symbol for the rebellion and we are trying to foster. Like, she could have been given literally anything that told her not to just try and die.
Yeah.
And she wasn't. And then all of her attempts to die were thwarted. Like, she could have been given some agency.
Yeah, because she was trying to die, they got thwarted in ways that meant that other people died.
Yeah.
And
that could have been completely avoided without putting in jeopardy their mission. And it just is piling things on her. Because now, not only does she not get what she wanted, not only is she thwarted in her plans, but now other people she cares about are dead, and she didn't even get a chance to protect them because the whole point was that she wouldn't have to be there to deal with it.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just a lot.
Yep. And we put this after PTSD and escalation because that PTSD probably contributes to her wanting to die. And we went back and forth on which one of them is the one higher in escalation, and we went with what contributes to the other. So. On to the wrap-up for our gratuity rating with Cinna. Do you think it's off-screen or mild? Well, a very particular...
There is a scene that I think kicks it up to either moderate or severe.
There's a very specific scene that is severe.
I think it is mostly... Because it's not totally off-screen. The whole point of it is that it's not off-screen, it's just very well managed.
Right.
And especially with, like, the actual outfits she gets and the conversations he has with her when he gives them to her, it's a not off-screen.
Okay.
I think it is mostly mild, but that one scene is severe. Which is it looks weird when I write mild/severe, but also, I think that's accurate.
True. Yep. For Katniss and Hollywood PTSD.
Severe.
Yep. For Katniss and self-sacrifice,
Also
it's somewhere between moderate and severe.
I think it's pretty severe.
Okay.
Especially with her goals.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty severe.
Alright. Cinna is integral to the plot.
Absolutely.
Just... Yeah, just
he
totally...
is her rock.
Yep.
Wow.
He is integral. And just trauma is integral.
Yeah.
The PTSD also is integral because it would be very weird if she went through everything that's happening and didn't have it and nothing was shown.
Yeah.
That would be bizarre and unrealistic.
More than, I mean, I don't even want to talk about whether or not it's realistic. That would just be a very emotionally dry book.
Yeah.
There would just be nothing happening.
Yeah.
Okay. Self-sacrifice. Super integral.
Yep. It drives
it's
a lot of pivotal plot points.
It's the whole story.
Yeah.
She volunteers as tribute. That's the whole story.
That's true. Yeah.
Like, it's literally the story. Treated with care. Cinna.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Cinna's treated with care. The PTSD, I think so.
I think it was treated with care.
Yeah. The self-sacrifice, I don't think it is.
I think maybe it's treated with enough.
Yeah.
Because I don't think it could have been treated with more and have it still been, again, like, had an impact on her.
Yeah. Okay. I'll go with enough.
Yeah, it definitely wasn't just treated with care, but so I was kind of joking about this before, but also like not on the recording, but like, this is a Katniss centered series. She's the only voice we hear. She's the point of view for the trauma and the aftermath of everything.
Yep. But I did want to make the point that with Cinna,
we do get his own words.
We get his own words, but also in terms of point of view, especially for aftermath, very deliberately, we only have Katniss's perspective for part of it. And that is on purpose to drive up the shock and horror and uncertainty and a whole ton of other negative emotions about this particular event.
Yeah, that's fair. But it still is just Katniss.
Yeah, everything on screen is Katniss, but I want to make the point that it matters that something wasn't shown.
In this one part, it matters.
Because Katniss didn't see what happened afterward. Right. I think that's important.
Okay, that makes sense.
The aspiring writer tip.
Aspiring writer tip.
If you're gonna show PTSD, have a varied and nuanced portrayal. And
yeah,
it's a varied and nuanced portrayal of the Hollywood version of PTSD, but it's pretty. It's good. Full enough to be its own thing, even if it doesn't exactly match a clinical diagnosis.
I mean, like
it might, but whether or not it does.
Yeah, like whether or not it's realistic, it was done in a way that it was just good, and
it feels complete.
It does, and it doesn't feel like someone just said, "What boxes do I need to check?" These. It doesn't matter whether or not those boxes are clinical or not, but it doesn't feel like someone was checking boxes. It feels like someone said, "Okay, how would this trauma come back and affect this character?" And then they made that happen.
And it's relevant to the plot. Like it drives decisions. It matters. Favorite non-traumatic thing?
Cinna. Cinna is my favorite. Cinna is my favorite character in this whole entire series, and Cinna's handling of things that could have been traumatic in ways that make them less traumatic is just really good. So Cinna is my favorite non-traumatic thing and also my favorite character.
Yep. I kind of like the interview guy. I don't remember his name now, but like the one who like just the amount of stuff he is juggling so effortlessly.
Oh my
and he's
gosh.
got like either 30 seconds or a minute or something. He's got a very short amount of time to get all this info out of all these people, and just everyone's got their own agendas. Like, I really loved the interview scenes.
Yeah.
In the book. All right. Is that our shortest wrap-up ever?
Possibly.
Okay. Well, thus far at least. All right. Thank you all for joining us, and we will see you in a fortnight.
Hey everyone, we're going to go ahead and read off our new patrons as of this month in February 2020.
We have 2 new patrons. They joined in January, which means they are the new patrons for February. And it is Chris Alvarado and Hallie. Thank you so much for supporting us. I hope you're enjoying all of your patron goodies, like access to episodes 1 week early. Thank you so much for supporting us. If you would like to become a patron, you can head to patreon.com/booksthatburn to get your shout out on the show.
All music used in this podcast was created by me as HeartBeatArt Co. and is used with permission.
You can follow us on Twitter at BooksThatBurn, all one word.
Email us with questions, comments, or book recommendations at booksthatburn@yahoo.com.
Support us on patreon.com/booksthatburn. All patrons get access to our upcoming book list and receive a one-time shout-out.
Leave us an iTunes review. This really helps people to find the show.
And find us on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Thanks for listening. We'll be back in 2 weeks.